Welcome to Coffee and Geography, where my guests and I geek out about the world and everything on it, discovering that we are all geographers in some way, shape or form. I'm your host, Kit, and my pronouns are they, them or she, her. So settle down with a brew, hit that subscribe or follow button, and enjoy the listen. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Coffee and Geography after our long, what seems a very, very long hiatus. It's season 3, and we have our first guest of the season, Dan Hall. Hello Dan, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. I quite enjoyed the cold snap we had, and folks who listen, because I know we got folks who listen all over the world, at least I like to think so. You know, we got down to, my mum got down to like -7 at one point. That's cold for here. But how have you found it? How did you find it?
Yeah, similar. It's kind of, well, it was very cold in the house. But it was sort of nice to feel kind of genuinely wintry in December, which we don't seem to get that much. But now it's sort of reverted to type and gone grey and rainy.
Yeah, which is a bit more classic. I think it goes without saying that we both give our thoughts and our consideration to those folks who are really struggling at this time of year with the very, the excessive high energy bills and whatever it is. It's not just keeping the house warm, it's to keep themselves warm. It's also keeping their homes warm enough to stave off things like mold and good living conditions. So it's so our thoughts go out to all you folks who are finding this a bit of a struggle right now, and I think you're probably relieved that we're now in double figures again for a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really brought it into focus for everyone, that experience of actually kind of monitoring how much you're spending on energy when you a lot of people would be fortunate enough to not really consider that too much, putting on the heating when it gets a bit cold. But there's probably very few people in the country who didn't have at least half an eye on it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope we can all move forward, take some positive learning from this going forward and benefits everybody in the long run. Right, so let's get introducing to you before we go off on a complete geographer's tangent without introducing you. So Dan is someone who never considered he would be describing himself as a proud geography nerd, but spends most of his time telling anyone who listened about the virtues of geography. So we're very similar there. He did his undergraduate degree at geography at the University of Oxford before a master's in environment, politics and society at UCL, which is University College London. He went back to Oxford School of Geography and the Environment as their first access and outreach officer, with the remit of encouraging as many young people as possible to consider both at Oxford and in general. Huge football fan, who also changed his passion for the beautiful game and environmentalism into voluntary work for the non-profit Football for Future. And we'll definitely have a little chat about that since the World Cup has just ended. So we will, as we're recording. So we'll definitely talk football a little bit later, Dan.
Look forward to it.
Right, so I see you drinking your drink. So what brew have you got in front of you today?
I've got a good old-fashioned tea, PG Tips, fully caffeinated. No coffee for me today. It's just I'm kind of coffee first thing in the morning, tea through the rest of the day, really. Soy milk and 1 sugar.
Oh yeah, I do oat milk, no sugar, oat milk. I see you got your Marvel Spider-Man mug.
I have, yeah. It's one of my favourites. I think it's I can't remember where I got it. I've had it absolutely years, but it's the first. I think it's maybe the comic book cover of like the first edition that featured Spider-Man or something. The kind of retro comic book cover. I think it's quite a nice design.
Okay, question for you then.
Mm-hmm.
So, classic comic Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movies, the Amazing Spider-Man movies, or the recent Spider-Man movies. What would you pick?
Oh, it's a great question because Marvel stuff is also something I'm a pretty big nerd about. God, the Sam Raimi movies with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, I think that sort of kind of set the bar and are very sort of nostalgic. And I think the Andrew Garfield ones were bad, but not because of him. And I really like Tom Holland, and I really like that version of the character as well. But probably as a standalone thing, I'd probably go with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed So No Way Home when they all got together, which was pretty awesome. No spoilers.
Yeah.
It's not a spoil, everybody. It's like comes out on all the trailers and everything like that. But yeah, that's pretty cool because, of course, if you're a fan of the comics or the cartoons, you know that there are very many versions of Spider-Man anyway.
Mm.
So it was the Marvel universe, movie universe, who tried to get them all together. So they did it pretty well. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was good. When I first heard about it, I was a bit worried, but I think
It
it
turned
was
out pretty well.
very well done in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Before we could talk about Marvel, I mean, I've cosplayed as Black Widow, so yeah.
Really?
So yeah,
Wow.
we could talk about this all day. But you're in Oxford, so as you mentioned, so you live in the middle of Oxford.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So so my my experience of Oxford actually first came through the fictional novels by Philip Pullman.
Right. Yeah.
His Dark
Lyra's Oxford.
Materials, Lyra's Oxford. That's right. And that I did that before I visited Oxford for the first time. So I've been to Oxford a couple of times now. But for those folks who have heard about Oxford, romanticised about Oxford, what would you say? What would you describe Oxford as being like, as from a person who lives there, works there, and maybe from a geographer's point of view?
Yeah, good question. Well, so as context, I lived in, I was sort of born and grew up in Wolverhampton, which you can't really tell from my accent now. I've sort of lived down south enough to have the kind of the yam yam taken out of me. But Wolverhampton's a very different place, and I love it. I still go home a lot of the time for football reasons. But it was certainly different moving to somewhere like Oxford for university. I'd say that there's some stuff that is absolutely kind of true about it in terms of comparing like the imagination of it to the real place, in terms of the buildings, the kind of beauty of the buildings, and it feels like nearly every building in central Oxford would be, if there was only one of them, it would be like a world tourist attraction anywhere else. But every building's like that here, or a lot of them anyway. And you kind of get that sense that the place is sort of full of history. But also, I find it quite funny, the kind of contrast between these sort of old kind of cathedrals of history compared to the very sort of modern things that are now next to them. So, just as an example, on the high street, there's a big building called the examination schools, where typically students go to have their final exams, dressed in the gowns and everything. And it's this sort of big, beautiful, ornate building that when you are walking towards it to do exams, is kind of a little bit intimidating. But most nights of the week, when you go past it, past a certain time in the evening, there's just this kind of very quintessential English town kebab van outside it. And it's just like that one kind of shot of like the kebab van in front of this really ornate building always kind of makes me chuckle a bit, just as a sort of contrast and the kind of old and the new of Oxford. But I mean, as a city as a whole, I think it has a real vibrance and energy about it, because you have University of Oxford, you have Oxford Brookes, so the term time population is massive. It's full of young people. There's a lot of young professionals as well. The university employs a load of people. So yeah, I love it. I think it's really, really fun place to live. Both when I was a student and now working as well.
I have I think at least sent 2 students to Oxford. I think. Well, I didn't send them; they went themselves, obviously, but they went on to do geography. So yeah, that's pretty good. And one went and did history. Bah. We can't win them all. I bet. Yeah, but something we said about the kebab van, it's something quintessentially British, or at least English, by having a kebab van or a kebab store right next to some old historic building. I mean, you go to Norwich, near where I live, and the main haunt for all of the nightclubs and stuff like that, and you literally have like Norwich Cathedral, Norwich Castle, and then just a couple of steps away, the kebab shops. It's just something very quintessentially English about all of that.
It's still got comforting about it, I think. That there's that sort of constant wherever. I mean, Oxford has quite a good selection of kebab vans, actually. There's maybe like 4 or 5, maybe a couple more that I don't know about, like all in a fairly short radius, and they kind of pitch themselves at tactical points of like the walks home of students from nightclubs to their colleges. I think it has a pretty good selection for the size of the city.
That's really interesting to me, is that I think that the mobile food vans are something which is, I think, relatively new over here in the okay, because when I used to live in the United States, there used to be mobile food vans all over the place that would turn up, particularly in college towns and stuff like that. You know, as you say, as the students were coming out. Now I seem to see more and more of them around. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When I was a student, well, you was a student, I don't remember there being like mobile food vans, but now they seem to be all over the place.
Yeah, I think they were kind of like in a sort of, as with a lot of things, tied up in the sort of council bureaucracy of English towns, in that they're kind of vans, but they're semi-permanent, so they have to have a license to be in those certain spots, right? So
Mm.
um, there's one that's kind of always pitches at the same spot on like the one of the biggest streets that leads, that's kind of walk home from a couple of different clubs to a couple of different colleges where the students live. That has a bit of a good reputation. So it's this, yeah, I think they have to have permits to be there, and it's
Yeah.
kind of shared with other stuff in the daytime as well.
Mm. And of course, folks, I know some people may be screaming at the podcast going, but what about ice cream vans, Kit? They've been around for donkey's years. And I'm like, no, that's not the same thing, folks. They're not like, they don't do the ratchet to put their steel peg down and like camp there for half a day. They're gone. In fact, by the time you found your, as my kids have experienced, by the time you found your money and ran out, it's off.
Yeah.
So not the same thing, folks. Okay, I'm gonna go straight into spilling the beans now, because I want you to talk about, and I know we kind of like touched a bit of it on Marvel because it's kind of sort of the same ilk, but it's about sci-fi. Because you are a big sci-fi nut, and you say here that you actually love particularly like sci-fi stuff, which contains like theoretical physics and things like that. So
Yeah,
you've
which
been
sounds really
reading something by Carlo Rovelli?
yeah, it sounds really pretentious, but I just kind of I like it when there's stuff that really is like the really mind bending things. And so one thing, for example, is like with black holes, and you get the kind of gravitational dilation stuff where it's like, if
Yeah,
you're close to a black hole, time goes, is it faster or slower, I think.
slower. Yeah,
And like, so I think there's been interesting stories told in different sci-fi stories about, like, you kind of have one end of a space station or ship or something closer to it, and time goes slower there compared to the other one. So that kind of thing I find quite cool, and it sort of, I guess it kind of links to the geographer in me, in the sense that there's a kind of fairly new field of outer space geography. So I say fairly new. It's fairly under researched anyway. But there's one really great article by an academic called Julie Klinger, talking about sort of the geography of outer space.
ooh,
And the fact that outer space does have this geography to it, because it has sort of gravity wells and black holes that do things to the relationships between space and time.
oh, that is amazing. I'm gonna have to look that up.
I
Geography of
recommend.
space. Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I totally agree with it. I've been giving him yet another shout out. I've been a regular guest on Andy Plasty's podcast called The Great Derelict, which is all about sci-fi, and so it's
Oh
something you
wow.
would enjoy. And in fact, I would argue probably tap Andy up to be a guest on that, because we actually have done like geography in Star Trek, for example, colonialism in Star Trek, and all that kind of stuff. But I want to go back to black holes because I love this kind of stuff. I'm the kind of person who will watch like copious amounts of YouTube videos, or read Wikipedia articles about all this stuff. In terms of sci-fi, there's two which in particular of my favorite sci-fi ever, which I really love. So the first one is Interstellar. Surely you've seen Interstellar.
I actually haven't. So it's
You
been one of
haven't
those.
seen
No,
Interstellar?
it's one of those films that for ages I've been like, well, I know I'll like it. I just need to get around to watching it, and just it hasn't. I don't know whether it hasn't been on any of the streaming things that I have, or I've just not. I just keep
Oh my
forgetting to
goodness.
get around to it. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, in that case, I'm going to have to do this in a spoiler-free manner. So there, I mean, the plot itself is not, the synopsis is not a spoiler itself. It's humanity's dying, climate change, everything like that, and they go out into the stars in order to see if they can find alternative places for resources or for habitation, whatever. And they send out scouts to visit these various planets because they come across this portal which takes them into different systems. and they come across this one planet which is near a black hole called
Mm.
Miller's Planet, and it is brilliant because they talk about how, because this is it's a Christopher Nolan movie, so it's going to be as scientifically factual as they possibly can make it.
Mm-hmm.
And when the ship arrives outside the time dilation effects of black hole, they start having this debate. It's like, well, who's going to go down? You do know that every second we go down there is going to be the equivalent of blah blah blah. So many days back here on the ship and all that kind of stuff. And it's absolutely amazing, and they've got to get in and get out as quick as they can, otherwise they're going to be gone years. And it's just fascinating.
That
Yeah,
sounds great. I will have to watch it because I
yeah,
think I was aware that there was this sort of time space dilation stuff in it, but I've just never seen it. It's just it's interesting with the plot of a lot of sort of near future sci-fi is always very pessimistic. It's always like, climate change has ruined the earth. We've done
yes,
some terrible. Like, I don't know whether it's just because something bad happening makes for a more interesting story in the future. Because if it was like we solved climate change and we carried on as normal, then what's your sort of narrative basis for starting your story? But I remember reading something about this, and I can't remember what it was for. Something I was doing in my studies, but about how that's kind of not always been the case. And actually, I think in the sort of 60s and 70s, a lot of sci-fi was a lot more utopian, a lot more optimistic, being like, we're going to space and this is going to sort of solve all our problems and we'll be happy.
yeah.
Whereas a sort of modern disillusionment, we're quite every story set in the future seems to be predicated on us having a disaster around about now.
Yeah, well, I guess the 50s and 60s were kind of the age of optimism, and I guess into the 70s, after the Second World War, and then the Cold War took place. It was then the narrative seemed to change. It was all about competition and getting one up over your opponents and whatnot. And yeah, of course, since we've now seen the effects of environmental degradation and climate change, it's been very much that's been the narrative. And one thing that's really interesting about Interstellar, and this was also discussed recently on Andy's podcast, was how it will be seen as one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time. But if we watch it back in 25 years, maybe for a 25th anniversary, it might not do so well because it might be cutting really close to the bone. Because we are not in any way of really solving climate change in a way which will protect the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
So you can definitely see, because it opens up with the fact that crops are dying and this kind of stuff, and they're and most of humanity. This is not a spoiler, everybody, because you can't send the whole of 7-8 billion people into space. So not everyone makes it off of Earth. So it is quite depressing, but I would say stupidly and depressingly realistic.
And a lot of those sci-fi tropes about it kind of being inevitable, that we're going to have a disaster and need to go to outer space. Those are what people like Elon Musk use to justify
well done.
Their kind of going to outer space. SpaceX making life multiplanetary, going to Mars and stuff. And this actually, I did my master's dissertation was on this, about the kind of justification of talking about the environment as a reason for the sort of space billionaires to want to go to outer space.
Yeah. Oh, that is, yeah. Because I was actually talking to my kids, especially my 8-year-old, and I was saying, yeah, like a lot of these rich people's solutions is to say, oh, let's just go terraform Mars, or have a moon base. And I took my eldest through the reasoning. I was like, okay, can everybody today afford to go on a flight? So okay, go back a few hundred, 100 years or something. Could everybody afford to go on a ship to another country? Go back. So can everybody afford a horse in order to get further rather than walk? And it's the same sort of thing. It's always going to be the elite and the privileged who are able to access these first. They will set the agenda because they get to access it all first. They get to set the ground rules. They get to pioneer. They get to, there's going to be freaking like McDonald's crater or a Starbucks, mountain or something like whatever. But still, it's a movie that does that exceptionally well, which is a fantastic environmental movie as well, is a kids movie, and that's WALL-E, who I think does that amazingly well. Talks about how the elite and the capitalist and the the consumerism is what destroys Earth. And I think it's a hidden message in the movie. It doesn't make it explicit at all, but all those people who are up in space in the Axiom, in the ship, very few ethnic minorities on that ship.
Mm.
If you watch that movie back again,
Right. Yeah.
and I think that was deliberate, not to be
Interesting.
racist,
Yeah.
but because it's like these are the individuals who had the privilege to escape a dying Earth.
Mm. Mm.
I don't think that gets talked about enough.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I wonder whether a movie like that, because obviously it's made, it was Pixar, wasn't it? It was a Disney
Pixar,
one.
yeah.
So, and it's like, well, how much of that message of anti-consumerism can a Disney movie be? But also, you can think of it from the other direction, like how much can the directors and writers get away with? So that maybe the messages have to be a bit more subtle.
Yeah. So it's brilliant. I mean, that's one of my favorite movies of all time. Even My Electric Car is called, well, it's called Eva because of the way of Wally pronounces it. But it's a fantastic movie. So okay, so we've geeked out there about some. All right. One thing I would like to talk to you now a bit about is the football.
Mm-hmm.
So, because as you say here, you're a football nut. You support Wolves. Bearing in mind where you're from, I love it. You're someone who supports the team where they're from. Yes!
Absolutely.
You're not a Man United supporter from Wolves, and
God,
I'm a Tottenham Hotspur supporter. And people say, "Well, how comes that, Kit? You're living in Norwich." Well, I used to live in that part of the world, so so that's
we'll let you off then.
yeah. So, and I know I'm not a glory hunter because I'm no Tottenham Hotspur is a glory hunter. So, yeah, and what you've put here, which I think is amazing, and I'd like to talk to you a bit more about it as well, is you're into some non-profit work with the charity Football for Future, or for the non-profit Football for Future.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this sounds absolutely brilliant. And I always am a believer that sport can be a thing that can change things for good. So tell us a little bit about it. Tell us a little bit about Football for Future and what you do and how you're involved with it.
Yeah, so Football for Future. I actually first heard of them. It was a special episode that the Guardian Football Weekly podcast did on the relationship between football and climate change. And there's a football historian called David Goldblatt, and who was involved in starting Football for Future, was the chair, the first chair, and he mentioned Football for Future on the podcast, and I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. So I looked them up, and at that time, it's just a couple of the guys who started it up. They were kind of just getting going, and so I emailed them, and basically have ended up doing sort of a bit of social media and blog writing for them. Essentially, Football for Future is trying to build a more sustainable culture in the beautiful game through getting at the problem from a couple of different angles. So we write blogs and social media posts and share kind of good news stories from around the sport, and kind of talk about what we think are good sustainable changes that can be made in the game. And that's always with the mindset of we're communicating with football fans as football fans, talking through the language of football. Football for Future always also does work with professional clubs and organisations such as Nike. So some of the guys ran workshops with Nike and Chelsea and your club Tottenham, delivering workshops through their foundations, and also did some stuff with Chelsea Academy recently as well. And then there's also the kind of more, so that's kind of more on the educational side. Then there's a sort of more, I guess, business advice side of things. So actually helping football clubs operationalize changes that are relevant to the football industry in terms of making them a more sustainable business. We also have like sort of player champions, so current professionals who want to speak up about climate change and aim to support them, giving them the confidence and resources that they're able to talk about it effectively.
So
but I'm quite a small part in that. I just write a few blog posts and social media posts, among
Wow.
some other random things.
It's great. Yeah. So I'm looking at the blog entries now. So you've talked about University of Oxford, who is responsible for English football sustainable transition. So that was a panel discussion you were involved with, and then
Mm-hmm.
supporting footballers to rise to the awareness of climate change, the Dixon Foundation. So talking about what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium it's not as sustainable as I'd like it to be, but it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
more sustainable stadiums in the
Yeah.
country. But of course, the number one stadium, if you want to call it that, ground, because it's not as big as the stadium, but the number one, of course, is going to be Forest Green Rovers.
Yeah.
So what, they in League? Are they League One now? I think.
They are, yes, they're League One. I think they got promoted last season. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see that. That'll be. Could you imagine Forest Green Rovers in the Premiership? Like, Pete, you got all these like hardcore fans, Premier League fans, go and get some of their vegan pies.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that because so on the podcast episode that I originally mentioned, the Guardian Football Weekly one, one of the other guests they had on it was Dale Vince, who
Okay.
is the chairman of Forest Green Rovers.
Yep. And
And
Ecotricity.
yeah, and I found it really interesting the way he kind of phrased some of the stuff around the food choices in the stadium, because it was really obvious in hindsight, but I've just never heard anyone set it out like that before. So he talks about the fact that they're offering all vegan food in their stadiums, and he explained it like, well, if you've ever been to a football match, you'll know that the food is terrible. It's like overpriced, soggy burgers and hot dogs and like 5 chips with a slice of American cheese on it. Like, it's rubbish. So would you rather have that or a hummus and falafel wrap for like the same price? That's like fresher and tastier. And like you can still get pies; they're just vegan ones. And I thought it was just a very sort of matter of fact and accurate way of describing it. Like the food at football matches is bad. The vegan alternative is not sacrifice; it's actually better. And he's like, well, you know, if you don't want it, plenty of people go to matches without buying the food there. You just bring your own food or eat before you go to the match.
Totally,
And I think
100%.
there's a really good way of making a sustainable change without people feeling like they're having it kind of rammed down their throat, which, or literally in the sense of.
Yeah. No, I mean, we the attitude we have at this household is that we are baseline vegan, which means, you know, by default we have vegan stuff. But we're vegetarian as well. You know, we don't mind eating dairy products, stuff like that. But we always consider where it's sourced from. And then in terms of meat, we have white meat once in a blue moon, and we are zero waste. So say if we were to see the butcher was discounting something because, you know, it was going to go off, or the supermarket was discounting stuff because it was going to go off or something, then we'd get it. Or we go to a party and the only thing left are those tatty sausage rolls, and it's like they're just going to be thrown in the bin. No, there is a bin right here. I will digest it. So I still don't know if there's a term for that, because I know there's terms like flexitarian, pescatarian, all that kind of stuff. But I don't know, carbonitarian, low carb, just low carbon diet. I guess that's just
yeah. I mean, I'm pretty similar. So I'm not. I've gone through phases of being kind of vegetarian. I did veganuary once or maybe twice, and I found that really hard because the difference between the kind of admin difference between vegetarianism and veganism. So in the sense that so much of what you just assume is fine actually will have like egg white in as a binder or something. So you're constantly checking labels, which I found really annoying. But being veggie, you know, I don't find too difficult. But what I do, I don't buy meat to cook at home. And you know, I cook a lot, so that's kind of fine. But I don't sort of deprive myself of it if I'm out and the veggie option's bad, or there's something that I really want. I'll kind of allow myself that as occasion. So I guess that's flexitarian.
Yeah, and I don't think, you know, we're not, you know, people like ourselves who obviously we want all to get on the bandwagon with climate change stuff. That no one is. I'm not really saying give up meat totally or something like that. You know, it's all about don't worry about the food itself. Have a look at its carbon content, and then just like circling back to the beginning of the chat, just like you turn your thermostat down a degree or two, it's how can you turn your carbon consumption through your food down a few,
And it's about
100
making it,
grams or two. Yeah.
yeah, it's about making it a change that's sustainable for you in the sense that you can
Yeah.
sustain it, right? Like, it's no point doing. I mean, you can do veganuary, but if you're doing it for climate reasons, and then kind of rebound and immediately think, "Oh God, I'm dying for a burger,"
Want a
and
steak
then
now.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah, and then have it like 4 times in a week, then you've probably kind of undone it.
Yeah.
And there's also, there's a study done before, I can't remember the authors, but about the sort of, actually there's a sort of balance that if with different permutations, actually eating like a little bit of some meat, like chicken and pork, less, and beef's obviously more environmentally damaging, like occasionally with the rest veggie, is the sort of most climate optimum diet, because if everyone was like went completely vegan overnight, then we need to grow loads more soya and that kind of thing. So
Absolutely.
there's
Yeah.
different perspectives on that, but I think it's important to remember we don't all have to be kind of suddenly vegan.
Yeah. Because then we would be putting consumption rates up and demand rates up on a lot of things, as you said, like on growing soy or something like that. We sidetracked a bit there, but very, very, very nicely we sidetracked. Let's bring it back to the football. What is your opinion on the sustainability, the claimed sustainability on the recent Qatar World Cup? Do you have a view on that?
Good question. I would say that I.
Putting aside the fact that everyone had to jet there in order to have the competition, because we know that that's always going to put the carbon footprint up. But in terms of the hosts and the hosting it of it, what do you think?
I severely doubt. I really doubt the claim that it's carbon neutral. And there have been people who've researched it recently who've kind of said that they would not say that it's accurate to describe it as carbon neutral. I mean, for example, a couple of days before the final was a bit of a publicity thing. They sent to the match balls into space in a partnership with SpaceX. They're probably not including that in their carbon accounting because why would you include carbon emissions from marketing in your carbon budget? But that probably produced as much greenhouse gas emission then.
How did I not know this? They sent some of the match balls into space.
Yeah, they
Good
did. They did.
grief. As much
Yeah.
as I like space and stuff like that, that is just, there is no benefit in that whatsoever. I mean, space exploration has benefits to humanity, technology development. So that is just, oh my God, that's just, I don't know, that's just made me so angry.
And the environmental impact from space launches as well. Like, it's not like flying a plane in the sense that, or driving a car. It's one of the few times you actually inject those kind of warming greenhouse gases directly into the upper atmosphere. So they actually sort of per ton of CO2 or whatever has more warming effect than the same amount of CO2 emitted from your car or something.
Yes. Well, you heard it here, folks. Any claims about sustainability at the Qatar World Cup, they blew it hundreds of times over by sending match balls into space. Well,
I mean, in general, in football, it's quite difficult to know where to draw the line, because the vast majority of carbon emissions, when we're talking about football, is fan travel.
yes.
And then it's like, well, is it fair for clubs to sort of take ownership of that? And because I mean, they're beginning to. I think they're including that as kind of what we call Scope 3 emissions when they're doing their carbon accounting. But then it's like, well, what can clubs do? Because actually, public transport is a nationally or local government decided thing, and I'm sure clubs would love it if they had less traffic around the stadium and all the supporters were able to get on public transport. Yeah. There is stuff that clubs can do. So Brighton is a good example, actually. So they provide, I believe it's free bus and train travel within a certain zone to home and away fans. So that's like a good initiative, and providing cycle parking and I'm always of the opinion that like clubs have quite a lot of money. I'm sure if they like partnered with the council, they could put on like a couple of extra bus services on match days and things like that.
Yeah, that anyone can use, not just the fans.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, that comes back to the co-benefits. So to link it back to where I'm from, Wolverhampton, Wolverhampton's a one-club city and a city centre that really isn't in the best of shape these days. And I think without the football club there and without the football club doing well, like I'm not entirely sure why anyone would go into the city of Wolverhampton, because it's so
Wow.
easy to get to Birmingham now. So actually,
Yeah.
like it's so quiet most of the time, apart from on match days where it's every pub is rammed. So you think, in terms of co-benefits to the city, if everyone was able to go into the city centre, meet your friends for a drink and for some food before the game, and it's easy to, and you can walk from the city centre to Molineux, the stadium. But if basically less people drive and more people are able to do social stuff like that and spend the money in local pubs and bars before the game, sort of everyone wins. And I'm pretty sure most football fans wouldn't want to drive to a game, because I think it's fair to say most football fans would quite like a drink at the game, or at least not to have the worry of driving.
And I'll tell you what, football, the economy of football, could really quite lend itself exceptionally well to something like the circular economy. It really, really can, which is what we're trying to move towards in order to have a more sustainable, fairer, version of capitalism, of consumerism. And you gave a perfect example there about how it could work, in a place like Wolverhampton. And I knew that football clubs, some football clubs are very important to their locations, some more than others. But now rethinking about it, I can see how they have such a profound impact on the economy of their local areas, such as in the place of Wolves, where it would be, what else has it got going for it at this point in time?
Yeah, and Wolverhampton's a city, right? So you think that effect is even greater in places where it's a small town, and the football club is basically everything. Everything in that town revolves around it.
Yeah,
I think Wolverhampton. Maybe I'm being slightly harsh as someone who doesn't live there anymore, but for me, I think its proximity to Birmingham and how much sort of work Birmingham's had on it in the last couple of decades means a lot of people, for shops, for eating out. It's 20 minutes on the train, or you can get a tram. It's very easy to get into Birmingham now, so it's kind of sucked a lot of the life out of dear old Wolverhampton.
Yeah, I think a lot of satellite settlements around London who are on the fringes of the London network, I think the people living there would probably agree with you, to be fair. That kind of satellite settlement effect. Quick game to play with you before we finish off, right?
Sure.
So I'll put the link in the description for everybody so they can download it. So I through my absolute geekiness, just like you, I've created a Excel spreadsheet with development indicators. And the article that I wrote about this spreadsheet talks about why development indicators aren't great, folks, and they're very colonial. But you can read the article for that. But let's just have some fun here. So we've got all the groups. So from the World Cup, all the clubs in their groups. So in Group A, we've got Netherlands, Qatar, Ecuador, Senegal. But you can rank the teams by a certain development indicator. Right? Okay. And then they will go through to the next round according to the ranking. So we could do this two ways. I can either give you a random team, and then you've got to try and get that team all the way to the final by selecting the correct development indicators. Or I can let you choose a team, and then you try and score a goal by selecting development. I'll give you choice of two development indicators, and you've got to choose the right one where you've either scored or you've missed, or you've blazed the Harry Kane penalty above the bar, or you've put it in the corner of the net. Okay, let's let you choose a country. Try and go for one where you might think they could win some, they could lose some. Give you a bit more of a challenge. What do you reckon?
From any team that qualified for the World Cup?
Any team that qualified for the World Cup.
Let's go for... let's go for England. Why not?
Okay, we'll go for England. Okay, so a lot of these...
I can choose a different one if you want.
I'll just go for England. So a lot of these statistics are based on the UK because it's quite difficult to get devolved statistics, but there are some statistics which are devolved where the statistics are for England only. Okay, so you've got to get England in the top two of the group, right? So I'm going to give you a choice of three development indicators, and you've got to make sure that you pick the one which puts England in the top two. Right. Okay, so first one is, and some of these could be really, really straightforward, but the first one is the share of seats in Parliament held by women, the percentage share of seats held by women, the percentage of urban population, or the LGBT equality index. Which one of those are you going to go for to get England in the top two? Put some football music over this, I think.
LGBTQ equality index.
Okay, so if I organise by that, and the two who go through from Group B are England and Wales. So they both have 84%, or an index of 84 out of 100. The United States finished third with 82, and Iran finished bottom of the group with 6. Right.
Yeah, I imagined that Iran wouldn't be too great on that metric.
No. Okay, so in the second round, England are facing Ecuador, because Ecuador finished second in their group, according to the LGBT Equality Index. Right. Okay, so, what do I choose here? So, we're going to go for, dependency ratio, which is the lowest is the better, because you've got less dependents. I know it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but still. So, dependency ratio or internet usage. They're easy-ish oppositions, so perhaps this is an easy choice for you. So we'll give you 3 chances. You've got to win at least 2-1, of course. So what are you going to go for? Are you going to shoot with dependency ratio or internet usage?
I'm going to put my foot through internet usage.
Yeah, 1-0 to England. That was pretty straightforward. So internet usage is 95% in England and 65% Ecuador. Right. So are they going to equalise, or is you going to put the killer blow in now? So let's see. The next one is having a look around here. Carbon dioxide emissions. Obviously, the lower the better. Carbon dioxide emissions and unemployment rate, where the lower the better. So you're going to carbon dioxide emissions or unemployment rate. Which one are you going to put this game to bed? Here comes Marcus Rashford with his charity work, dribbling down the wing.
I'm going to go for... what was the second one again, sorry?
So unemployment or carbon dioxide emissions, tonnes per capita.
I'm going to go for unemployment.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. So England, and Marcus Rashford just stuck it in the back of net, and England have gone from 2-0. Right. Yeah, so now, quarterfinal, England-Mexico. So Mexico got through on the back of unemployment in the last... Who did they beat? They beat Denmark on unemployment rate. Wow.
Wow.
Okay, that's a surprise. So England-Mexico. Yeah, let's make this a bit more harder for you. And folks, I hope you're playing around at home as well. That'd be good. This one is going to be tricky for you. Right, so urban population, and I'm going for highest is better, because in general higher density populations tend to be more sustainable because there's more interconnectivity, whereas lower density is more, so we want to have the highest urban population will score you a goal. So urban population, or I want to make this tricky, renewable energy consumption, where the higher is the better. So urban population or renewable energy consumption. Because we're short of time, this is golden goal.
Yeah. This is a little bit harder. I'm going to go renewable energy, but I'm feeling like Mexico might have a bit of hydroelectric, so I might be wrong here.
Okay, so posted in. You scored. Yeah, 12. So renewable total percent of final energy consumption 12.24%. UK and 10.34% for Mexico. So only just pipped it. So you're in the semi-final. Right. So in the other semi-final, it's Portugal, Australia. And in England's semi-final, it's Switzerland. It's getting harder now because in terms of Human Development Index, they're very close together.
In terms of football, I think Gareth got lucky with another easy run, but...
Yeah, but it's getting harder now. Right, so this is going to be really tough. Very, very comparable countries, right? So, again, we're going to go... It's gone into extra time, and this is going to be the winning goal, right? So,
I'm going to go... lean forward when you try harder.
I know, yeah. This is great. I'm definitely going to choose this one, because it's a semi-final. It's got to be hard. Okay, which team has the latest Earth overshoot day? So... if you pick that one and England's got the latest Earth overshoot day, they'll go through. But if you're wrong, it'll be Switzerland who go through. So Earth overshoot day, are you going to take a shot with that? Or are you going to take a shot with, let's go with share of seats in Parliament held by women again. Earth overshoot day or the share of seats in Parliament held by women? Which one does England come out on top? This is tricky.
Share of seats in Parliament.
Okay. So, oh no, Maguire has just lost hold of the ball. It's been nicked.
No.
Switzerland and Shaqiri has just slotted it in the corner of the net, and Switzerland have just put out England in the semi-final. Yeah, if you'd have gone for so it's 39.8% for Switzerland and 31.1% for
Oh,
the
wow.
English Parliament. Whereas Earth Overshoot Day, England has an Earth Overshoot Day of 6 days later than Switzerland, 19th of May compared to the 13th of May.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I'm
So that is
afraid
interesting.
England have fallen at the semi-final. They play Australia in the third place. No one cares about the third place playoffs. We're not even going to try that.
No,
But
no.
I just so Portugal, Switzerland are in the final, and if you go straight on Human Development Index, then it would actually be Switzerland who come out on top, and Australia would beat England in the third place playoff on Human Development Index as well. So England finished fourth again.
Wow, we just can't make it past the semis.
No, we're destined to not make it past the semis. But there you go, folks. That is the World Cup being played out via failed or fallible development indicators.
That was a lot of fun, and I hope that from that I've thrown my hat in the ring for the England job when Gareth does step aside in 2024.
Yeah, well, a semi-final, that's not too bad, not too bad at all. We've got to be happy with this, folks. To be constantly quarterfinalist, semi-finalist, finalist is not bad going. Gareth Southgate is the most successful England manager since Sir Alf Ramsey.
Yeah. No, I'm content. That's how I describe myself with England.
Okay, last thing to finish off with then is the trademark of this podcast, which is we are all geographers, where we're going to be linking everybody together, all the guests together, by having a 30-second bash at a single word and linking it to geography. So you've been ganged up on, Dan, because the last episode of the last season, I actually had a coffee house. So I had like a bunch of people, previous guests, turn up, and they all decided together that they thought it'd be so much fun and a laugh that they knew I was going to be recording this in December or January. And at the time we did the coffee house, we had just had that 40 degrees Celsius containing heat wave.
Wow,
So they went for the word heat wave. Not because it's going to be a hard word for you, but because they knew you were going to be doing it this time of year. So
true.
Tricky of them. So I'm going to set my timer here, Dan, and basically you'll smash this easy. So basically you've got 30 seconds to talk about the word heat wave in any context, but preferably geographical context. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, your 30 seconds start now.
Okay, well, with the heat wave, I'm going to link it back to the one that you're talking about that we did experience back in the summer. Heat waves as a kind of climate extreme or a form of extreme weather likely to become more severe and more frequent as a result of climate change. And I think it really brings it to the fore of our daily lives in the UK when we have to deal with those temperatures that our country, our infrastructure is just completely not built for. Train tracks buckle, we haven't got air conditioning, and our houses get too warm.
Yeah. Yeah, it was an easy topic, depressing one, easy one, and it brings it back to some conversation we had earlier in the chat as well. Thanks for that, Dan.
No worries. It was kind of, I had too much to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah. What I'd maybe just like to add as well is that linking it back to the football thing, actually, heat waves and indeed cold snaps are not very good for football. So it's one thing that in Football Future we talk a lot about is the impact not just of football on climate, but of climate change on football, and the fact that this is football's problem too. So particularly when you get below the Premier League and they don't have undersoil heating or are able to water it constantly, non-league clubs lose weeks of the season to extreme weather, get flooded in certain places, and actually many stadiums by the sea.
I can't get out of my head the picture of Carlisle United's football ground a few years ago during that flood.
And
then they did a lot of community work, didn't they, to try and support the community to recover from that flood.
And there's a club that we've spoken to, Tadcaster Albion, I think they're called.
Oh, yes.
Up in, I believe it's Yorkshire, who've been flooded, kind of get flooded several times a year at this point. And they're a small non-league club. They can't afford to keep sort of repairing everything all the time. There's a stat that now I might get this wrong, and this will be embarrassing because I say this stat a lot. But I think it's about a quarter of English Football League clubs, so in the top four divisions, will be likely to be at least partially flooded once a year. by I think 2030, based on current climate predictions. Because a lot of them are by rivers or the coast, right? And those that aren't will experience flood risk in other ways.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Because that's where, at the time, the most available flattish land was on the floodplain.
Yeah, exactly.
Norwich Carrow Road is on
the
Carrow Road. They used to be up on the hill donkey's years ago, but now they're right by the River Wensum. So, yeah.
Monmouth will be okay though. We're on a hill and in the Midlands.
So, Dan, for the next guest, then you get to choose a word for them to have a pop at for 30 seconds. Have you got something in mind?
I did, and now I've forgotten it. Let's. Okay, well, so we're recording this on the 20th of December. I'm about to travel home for Christmas, so let's go with Christmas.
Let's go with Christmas. Excellent, because that can mean so many different things to so many different people. So I'll see what the next person comes up with. Well, brilliant. Thank you. So before we get going then, Dan, this is your chance to give out any shout outs and to plug your wares of any kind, and where can people find you on social media and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, so as we mentioned right at the start, my day job at the moment is I do outreach for the School of Geography and the Environment, which is the geography department at the University of Oxford. So if you or anyone that you teach or anyone that you know is interested in studying geography broadly, and maybe potentially the University of Oxford as well, please do get in touch. So you can email me, which is access-outreach@ouce.ox.ac.uk, and you can find that on the School of Geography website as well. It's pretty easy. I'm also on Twitter. I might get this wrong actually, so you might have to remove this in edit. It's at Dan Hall _97. I have two, so I get confused. And then also I'll give a shout out to Football for Future as well. So if you search Football for Future or Football Climate Change Organisation, you'll probably be able to find it through Google. The website there, really excellent blogs from a lot of the team, and on Instagram, Twitter as well, and LinkedIn too. So if you just search for Football for Future, it should be pretty easy to find.
Brilliant. Yeah, do check that out, folks. It's a really good example of what I've been saying a lot, and Dan will say it a lot all the time, is that how sport can be a really, really good, thing for the community and stuff like that. It's not all about 22 Muppets kicking around a pig's bladder. So,
Yeah, it's about the what it means to people, and the fact that people listen when footballers say stuff, right?
They most certainly do. And you just, as we've already mentioned his name already, you just look at the impact of people like Marcus Rashford, and what they have done. And it is, I'm a massive Rashford fan over some of the other well-known footballers, which I adored seeing bursting into tears in the quarterfinal of this World Cup. But they do have a lot of power. And this is when I keep saying, you folks are role models. You have got such a power and a privilege that you can use for better. And that's why I love football, because I think most of them do a decent job, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that's why I love Gareth Southgate, because he is a good chap.
He's a good chap.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Dan. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you also for kicking off season 3 for us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you had fun. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe so more stories and experiences can drop into your favourite podcast app. If you fancy being a guest or have any feedback, follow us on Twitter @CoffeeGeogPod and send us a DM. Or you could email coffeeandgeog@geogramblings.com. Until next time, keep geogging.